Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm your host Anna Heslop, and today I'm talking to FAR's senior researcher for maize, David Densley, about what I like to call making the most out of maize, but what David calls beyond first principles. Now, welcome, David.
Yeah, good morning, Anna, and thank you.
David's just completed a round of 7 workshops around the country where he's been talking to growers about how to make the most out of maize. So if you're one of those people who's attended one of those events, this is your chance for a wee bit of backup and a bit of reinforcement. And if you didn't make it, we'll try and cover off just a once over lightly at the sorts of things that were discussed in those 7 workshops. So, David, one of your key statements around at those workshops, and I know because I attended a couple,
yes,
is that maize yield is at its highest when the seed is in the bag in the seed store. Do you want to tell us a wee bit more about that?
Yes, and it may seem quite simple to think about it like that. So, of course, that genetic potential is at its highest in that bag. But what we do to that bag of seed, so how we handle it actually, right from when we pick it up to the store, from the store to when we plant it, how we plant it, the fertilizer we put with it, the herbicide, our pesticide control, and the weather that's coming up, all has an influence on the final yield that we get out of that bag of seed.
So you've just listed off a whole file of things there. Some of them, as a grower, you've got some influence over and some not. So, I mean, how does New Zealand stack up for maize production, maize yield?
And that's the exciting thing about being a maize producer. You know, we've got this enormous genetic potential out of this bag of seed, and that's through the great work that plant breeders, maize breeders have done all around the world. And so that genetic potential carries on yearly, pretty much relentlessly. And to put that in context, during these Beyond First Principles workshops, we set off by featuring David Hula. Now, David Hula is the world record holder for maize grain yield. In fact, David has broken the record 3 times, and that current record is over 37.5 tonnes of maize grain per hectare. And for those maize silage growers, that's around 55 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. And David has broken that record through this yield competition that's carried out in North America through the National Corn Growers Association. And to break that record, you need to have 4 hectares of contiguous maize. So he hasn't done it on a small area. He's done it over 4 hectares. And so those hybrids that David is using are the same hybrids that some of our farmers can grow here in New Zealand. So there's enormous potential sits within that bag of seed.
So how does that yield compare with what would be an average yield? And, you know, I mean, there's always highs and lows, but
Indeed.
what you'd sort of be hoping for as an average grain or maize silage?
So if you think, with the FAST survey that the AIMI survey that is done annually, the average maize grain yield sits at around 11.5 to 12 tonnes per hectare, and the average maize silage yield sits at around 21 tonnes per hectare. And of course, within that, there are farmers that are producing a lot more than those yields in New Zealand, but that's what the average currently sits at.
So obviously the David Hula levels where everything was perfection. That's how you get world records. But I mean, what are the 4 key things that really impact on maize yield or any plant?
And those 4 are, 1, the number of plants we plant per hectare. Number 2, for maize, the number of cobs that we have per plant. And in New Zealand, we typically just aiming for 1 decent cob, although David Hula averages about 1.25, 1.5 cobs per plant. Number 3 is the number of kernels per cob. And the 4th one is the density of each one of those kernels. They're the 4 key areas that are going to drive that ultimate yield potential.
Okay, so those are 4 things which, as a grower, you would be hoping to influence through your management in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking at maize growth stages. I mean, obviously, they're quite key to decision making. That's going to influence those 4 factors.
Yes, indeed. So we can, so of those 4, we might park the second one, that is the cobs per plant. So if for this conversation, we'll assume that we just want one decent cob per plant. So starting off with number 1. So plants per hectare. So obviously that's the population that you choose. So am I going to have a modest population, or is my population going to have I got a higher target for population? And some of those, what will influence some of that decision is around the weather forecast and my soil's ability to hold water. But it's more than just plants per hectare. So what we're wanting to do is achieve uniform spacing within those plants. So each seed ultimately, we need to try and hit that equidistant seed to seed within the row. And then the other critical part is around emergence. So really we want to try and target even emergence, so within 12 hours, that's our ultimate goal.
What sorts of things can you do to influence that?
So seed quality is really, really important here. If we want uniform emergence, it's really, it's fundamental to have high quality seed that's going to come out of the ground, with plenty of seed vigor. It's going to come out of the ground quickly. But planter setup has a lot to do with that. And then in our Beyond First Principles workshops, we didn't really spend too much time on this, but it is a fundamental practice.
Cool. So then we were skipping cobs
Yep.
per plant.
Mm-hmm.
Then we were looking at kernels per cob.
Yes.
How much influence does a grower and grower decision making have on that?
Yes. And we're going to talk about the game of 2 halves within our production system. So from emergence through to V14 growth stage is when we determine our yield potential. What happens after V14 through to when we harvest our grain, then we realise that potential. So if we're looking at the number of kernels per cob, then what we do between emergence and V14 will influence that number.
Okay, so what sorts of things we must be talking about? Fertiliser, we're talking about weed and pest management, we're talking about keeping our fingers crossed that it rains.
Yes.
What sorts of things are we on about?
Yes. So with Beyond First Principles, what we've done in the workshops, we've assumed that the first principles are already in place, and they are fundamental. Those first principles are absolutely fundamental, and they can make up to 60, 70, 80% of your final yield. So those first principles are certainly hybrid selection and making sure you've got that right. So, you work with your seed company and your merchant to understand that best hybrid for your environment. So the right maturity, what sort of leaf disease resistance do I need, other characteristics that you need in your hybrid. And pest and weed control is another first principle. We certainly don't want to lose sight of those first principles. They're fundamental. So in our workshops, we assumed that they were already in place.
Okay. Beyond first principles, you've got the basics right. Mm-hmm. Now what?
And the third one is around kernels per cob. And so what influences that, the number of kernels per cob is how uniform our plants are within the row, how quickly we get it out of the ground, how uniform we get it out of the ground. And then things like plant nutrition become really important. Remember that our yield potential is set between emergence and V14. So so V14, for those that are not familiar with growth stages, that's around head height. So getting that those getting the nutrients right is fundamental as well. As an industry, we probably haven't spent enough time thinking about what's going on in the plant as far as nutrients are concerned. So, we've spent some time talking about macronutrients within the industry. We know about those: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and sulfur. Okay, and they form the first principles. But what about our micronutrients? Our zincs, copper, manganese, boron, and some of the others. They become really important as well as we hunt for this higher yield potential that sits within our bag of seed.
So they're those sorts of things, those micronutrients that can make the difference between an average and an above average yield.
Absolutely. And, we've talked at our workshops, we talked about climate and climate change as well. And so more extreme weather events. And so we need to build resilience within our plant. And so, to build resilience means that you need these healthy plants, okay? And so it could be a micronutrient or micronutrients that are holding you back. It could be that while visually that plant may seem okay, subclinically it may have some deficiencies. So we need to be spending more time looking at what's going on with our plant.
How do we actually do that? So we're talking about fertilizer, nutrition, macro and micro. So as a grower, and you've just said it's hard to look at a plant and tell exactly what's going on, in a beyond first principles, really good decision-making and management targeting the best possible yields, what would your fertilizer strategy be? I'm not talking about the actual amounts necessarily, but the process you would go through to ensure nutrition was optimal.
Is right.
So pH would be the first thing you want to be looking at and making sure that it's optimal at around that 6 to 6.2. So now we've got our pH right. What next for ensuring that nutrition for the crop over its growth season?
Yep. So here we've assumed that we've got the nitrogen for this conversation. We've assumed that we've got the nitrogen right. That's a separate conversation in itself. So then we want to look at what's happening with our macro and micronutrients up in the plant. So here in New Zealand, it would be let's take some leaf analysis at that V5, V6, V7 growth stage. Remember that we're setting that yield potential, right up until that V14 growth stage. So we want this plant to be functioning to its capacity.
So what does that actually entail? How much leaf, how do you store it, how do you transport it to wherever it's being tested?
Yep. Yeah, good question. So just before I answer that, when we take leaf analysis, we want to be strategic around that. So it's just not a matter of going in, parking at the gate and going in beyond the headland and collecting some samples. So strategic means what's going on within our paddock. And so we might have areas, might be some light soils in part of our paddock, and there might be some heavy clay soils in another part of the paddock. So you might even collect two different lots of leaf analysis. It might be in the lighter soil areas, and then the other might be in the heavy clay soils. So we're collecting leaf analysis now, say V5, V6. You want to take the last true leaf. So that's a true leaf is the one. A true leaf has a collar around the back of the leaf, and so have to come along to some far field days, and we can actually show that in person. But it's got a collar around the back. So you want to collect that. You want to collect around 15 leaves, 15 to 20 leaves. It depends on how big the plant is and when you're taking the sample. Around 15 to 20 samples, 15 to 20 leaves. And that makes up one sample. And if you've got two different soil types, you might want to do that in a couple of locations. Plastic bag, sorry, not a plastic bag.
I was wondering about that. Usually it's a paper bag.
Paper bag. Obviously, you want to keep the sample fresh. So get that to the lab as quickly as you can. If you can't, just stick it in the fridge and get that to the lab as soon as you can. At flowering though, so between V5 up till flowering, we're taking, or just before flowering, we're taking that last true leaf. At flowering and beyond flowering, our leaf location changes. Where's the cob at? Or where's the cob going to be? And you take the opposite leaf and one below the cob. So anything we do beyond that stage then is also at that same location. That is the leaf opposite to the cob and one below, I guess is a simpler way of putting that.
Is it easy to interpret that information, or do you need a bit of help with that if you've not done it before? Because figures are going to come back, but, how do you know what the optimal zinc or manganese or other figures should be?
Yes, yeah. Look, and what we've done traditionally, and I'm generalising here now, right, because there's a lot of maize growers through New Zealand and some could have been very focused on this for some time. I'm generalising here now. So at that general level, we really have only used leaf analysis when we've got a problem, okay? So there's a clinical issue, we go in, we take some leaf test, we do some leaf testing to try and figure out what's going on there. Here we're talking about this is a strategic approach where we just want to understand what's going on, and then have we got deficiencies? So your question is, we get the information back, and then how do we interpret that? Well, you really need, you engage someone that you trusted consultant, whoever that might be, whether that's your retailer, your seed person, the fertilizer companies.
So obviously, but you're testing at different times, and they're going to be, as you get closer to harvest, your opportunity to do anything about that is pretty limited.
Yep. Okay, so we do the leaf analysis, then how do we interpret, and then what do we do with the information? So in most cases, we use that information to help us for the following season.
Okay, cool. All right. So we are managing our nutrition. We're keeping an eye on it. We may or may not be able to do anything about it this year, but we'll certainly be aware of what's happening and address it next time around.
Yes.
What's the final thing we can do around ensuring that we're maximising yield potential for our soil in our season on our farm?
So water becomes a critical part here as well. Now, if you're blessed enough to have irrigation, then that's relatively easy. And I don't want to, easy in context, right? So at least I have the opportunity to put water on. For most maize production through New Zealand, we don't have that luxury. We can't be applying water through irrigation system. That won't be an option for us. So we depending on where you're at in the country, we need somewhere around 420 to 550, let's say 450 to 550 millimetres of water to produce a maize plant. So our evapotranspiration rate throughout the production season is around that 450 to 550 millimetres. But as our temperatures increase, our ETO, our evapotranspiration rates, our water needs go up. Actually, we need more water. So where's that water coming from? Well, obviously it's got rainfall, but if we've got less rainfall or more intermittent rainfall, then we're reliant on the soil to provide some of that water. And so, that's our storage mechanism. In our workshops, we also spend some time around not treating our soils like dirt. It's a bit of an old cliche, but boy, is it important. It's always been important, but it becomes more important with these extreme weather events. So, yes, getting your nutrients right becomes absolutely fundamental. But those nutrients that you can't get them up in the plant unless we've got water, okay, either from rainfall or from the soil.
Okay, so that soil quality, soil water or soil moisture retention we're going to touch on in a following discussion because, again, it's a biggie.
Indeed, it's a very big. In fact, a lot of our research is focused on that as well, Anna, and we're going to touch on that later as well.
Yeah, underground underpins everything.
Yes, indeed.
Okay,
indeed.
So have we touched on everything? It's been very broad ranging, but what I'm hearing is the key to gaining that maximising the yield potential, whatever the season, because obviously that's going to impact. It's all about attention to detail. And it's about measuring and monitoring and not just chucking it in the ground and walking away and saying she'll be right. Because it'll probably be okay and it'll probably be about average.
Yes.
But to get beyond average, check, test, manage, think about everything before it even goes in the ground.
Yes, look, I mean, you've summarised that well.
You'd think I knew what I was talking about.
Yeah, indeed. Well, so clearly you're paying attention at some of the workshops you attended.
I went to 2 of them. I listened. I listened a bit.
Very good.
Okay, well, thank you, David, for this discussion. Shortly, we will produce another podcast, and that'll be part 2 of Beyond First Principles, and that one is going to focus on soil quality, including that very important issue of soil moisture retention, and also retaining soil, full stop.
Indeed.
Okay, everybody, thank you for listening and have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.